2 p.m. Learn more at scwealthadvisors.com.
Listen to AM 560 The Answer online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, and on TuneIn, iHeart, and on Odyssey. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson. Only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy went on a bender with Dennis Prager last night. That's why I'm late.
Yeah. You know what? And guess what happens when I can't find you? I call Sean from Elmwood Park looking for you, and he doesn't.
He's not my minder.
I know this,
we don't stay in a bunkhouse together.
Well, I used to, when you lived at Lake Point Towers, I had your doorman's number.
Yeah.
I did.
Now I'm at an undisclosed location.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more difficult.
I can't find your bunker. But how was the event last night?
It was great.
Okay.
It was a good time. Great. Yeah, we had, I don't know, a few hundred people at Klein Creek for our cigar night with Dennis Prager. And as you know, Prager's a mensch, so it was good conversations. When we a little bit later in the show, maybe Open Mic Friday, I'll share a couple of the exchanges, get to people who were not in attendance to chime in on some of our discussions about the political reality of the days of today, when we have on one night you can have a president do an interview, former president do an interview that generates 200 million views, and then on the next day he is being arraigned for the fourth time in the last 6 months. It's surreal times.
Yeah, and I'm going to buy one of these Never Surrender T-shirts with his mugshot on it.
The surreal times also. I mean, also it's interwoven. Extend to our culture. Really interesting is that Sound of Freedom, that movie with Jim Caviezel about human trafficking, has surpassed Raiders. Has passed the latest and hopefully the last iteration of the Raiders of the Lost Ark series in terms of box office. It's like Sound of Freedom is like the Oliver Anthony song. It just struck a chord and generated such an unbelievable response from ordinary, everyday Americans. Very interesting. I guess it speaks to a yearning for something bigger, faith-based life, because that's certainly what motivated that agent who Caviezel plays in the movie to go and try to rescue children from human traffickers. And it also speaks generally to the belief that there's just a lot of evil in the world, and there's some people that want to confront it and some people that want to be willfully blind, which segues nicely to our next guest. He is Brandon Bug Hall. He's an actor turned Midwestern farmer. You don't hear that very much.
No, you don't. A real Green Acres.
Best known for Best known for his role in Alfalfa in the Little Rascals movie, the most recent iteration of it. And he's got quite a story as well. His sort of faith journey, as well as some things to say about that other matter, what Sound of Freedom was talking about, which is the exploitation of children, which is why we have him on this morning. Brandon Bug Hall, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So, just as a way of background, explain your connection to the individuals responsible for producing Sound of Freedom.
Yeah, so I grew up in Hollywood. Obviously, I worked there for 30 years, and about 10 years ago, my business partner, my writing partner, was working on a movie as an actor. He was working on this movie down in Mexico with these people I had never heard of. I knew most people in Hollywood at the time. And it turned out to be the Metanoia guys, the guys that produced Sound of Freedom, that wrote it, directed, produced it. And I thought they were crazy people. I mean, growing up in Hollywood, you want to be insulated from truth, right? And when people come speaking truth in a really plain way, it can be, it can kind of put you off. Well, long story short, we all became friends, and they converted me to Christianity. And which, I came in kicking and screaming. And we became business partners for many, many years after that. Their business affairs guy was our business affairs guy in our company. And we were sort of sister companies, for a long time. We fundraised for each other, and they've got a few scripts that we helped raise money for, and we shared offices. So I know those guys very well. I was texting with Leo when the news came out that Sound of Freedom defeated Disney's Monolith at the box office. It was just a phenomenal day, and I really owe so much to those guys.
Well, let's take us back a little bit further. When you were a childhood actor, what did you experience?
Right. So, yeah, I grew up, like I said, I grew up in Hollywood, and, I had experienced the same sort of abuse that you find in that movie, right? Same subject matter. I had actually experienced that abuse even before I started working in Hollywood. And so I think the predators in Hollywood, these predators have a kind of sixth sense for victims, I guess. And so, yeah, on Little Rascals, I was abused on that film, and then pretty continuous from project to project until I was about 12, when it finally just kind of tapered off. But
you were abused on that. You were abused.
Systematic.
You were abused on that film by who?
There were two gentlemen who I've gone through IMDb. You got to remember I was 8. I've gone through IMDb for many years trying to kind of pick out who it was. It was two gentlemen who, in hindsight, I now recognize they were a couple. They were that kind of that way. And the red flag, I suppose, should have been that they invited me to Disneyland, but it's a movie set full of children, and they only invited one of them to Disneyland, right? Just kind of like separate you out from the herd, so to speak. I'm not sure exactly who they were. And I've been asked this a lot. Ultimately, I don't trust the memory of an 8-year-old from 30 years ago. The horror of accidentally accusing the wrong person has kept me up at night.
Hey, good for you. Fair enough. But then you say the abuse continued as you continued acting. Yeah, through various projects, certain companies. I'm not sure if I can, what I can say or can't say, but certain companies definitely have a much bigger problem with that issue than other companies. And as a child actor, I worked, I worked for Disney a lot, and sometimes when I wasn't working for certain companies, there was no abuse, and I would happily go through the project, and then I'd end up on another project. And these people were all unrelated, to the best of my memory. They weren't people who knew each other or were in cahoots, as far as I could tell. It's just a systemic problem. Do you have memories of specific abusers, people who abused you, or people you saw abusing others during your time in Hollywood?
I never saw any of that in terms of anybody else. But as I got older, child actors I found that we have this way of sort of talking in code with one another and sort of sharing these things. I worked with a young man when I was 12 named Brad Renfro, who was a huge child actor, and he eventually overdosed and died. But I just admired him so much, and he was always kind of pulling me aside and taking me under his wing like a big brother. And he would say things like, there's people that are going to want to hurt you in this business, and you have to be tough, and you have to watch out for yourself. And I always took that to mean that he might have had those same experiences, and it was kind of teaching me to watch out for myself. And in a way, it kind of worked. I remember sort of taking on. That was the time I really started getting into bad things, right? the drinking and all of that. But the reason for it was you take on this sort of tough persona, right? Which is why you see these child actors kind of go off the rails, I think, sometimes. It's a way of protecting yourself. It's a way of kind of saying, well, if I don't represent a certain kind of innocence, and this is just subconscious, if I'm not representing a certain kind of innocence, I'm not going to be victimized anymore. And so you kind of go down that rough and tumble path. But, yeah, it's certainly common amongst other child actors.
Brad Renfro. I mean, for people to know, Brad Renfro, I remember him from Apt Pupil. I mean, that was which was a great movie.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, that was a phenomenal movie, and he was a great child.
So, do you think
sad.
childhood or child actors are still being abused on film sets and on TV sets?
Certainly, yeah, certainly. So what happened? Back in the '90s, I was right at the tail end of a different Hollywood in terms of the sort of freedoms that child actors had. It was still kind of the Wild West. It was the River Phoenix days still when I came into the business. And then there was this huge lockdown. I think River Phoenix actually might have been the impetus for that. Granted I was young and this is all hindsight. All of a sudden it was, there were lots of set teachers and there was social workers and it was tight hours. You strictly had to be off set the minute, your hours were up and things like that. But what happened was I think all of that abuse just kind of got pushed under the rug even further. And I certainly, you can see it by the effects, right? I mean, I can spot the symptoms of that sort of abuse in lots of people nowadays. When I got sober, I really took it upon myself. I was hanging out with a lot of current Disney actors and, younger people, they were maybe 10 years younger than me. But I had this, I was like Uncle Bug, right? I had this deep desire to kind of protect them. And I could just see it. You never talk about it. It's one of those things you don't just bring up to people. But you can just see the ones that are struggling and who likely had gone through that sort of stuff as well.
Well, it's interesting, and this prompts my next question about your parents' involvement, because Lawrence Fishburne tells a story about being on set as a child actor and his dad being there with a baseball bat.
Baseball bat, right?
Because
keep predators away.
Because right, if I see anybody doing anything that I think is untoward toward my kid on set, then I'm coming. So he obviously had some concern that was rooted in something to be on set with a baseball bat to believe what Lawrence Fishburne had to say. Of course, is a renowned actor.
Well, thank God for good fathers. I think I think you hit it on the head. So, before I had gotten into the business, the first abuse I experienced was with my biological father. Now, I was raised with my stepfather, who was one of the greatest men I've ever known, but he wasn't involved with that part of my life. In fact, he was very much against it. Being a stepfather is hard, right? Because there is I think a lack of authority in terms of the decision making with children, right? And he was very, very much against it. But my mom was very much in favor of it. My mother's also a phenomenal woman, but and I hope this isn't offensive to anyone. I think women have just different kinds of instincts. And I think these sorts of things, it's easier for them to go unnoticed. I don't think it's malice or carelessness or a lack of love. But I think if every child actor had their father on set instead of their mother, I think you would have a lot less of this.
Interesting. Well, there's also this thing too, where at least of a certain generation, where it was almost impossible to conceive of something like this. It just wasn't. Right. There wasn't the exposure of this sort of evil afoot. Certainly to the extent it is now. We talked to Tiffany Fitzhenry, who was like an up-and-coming screenwriter in Hollywood a few years ago, and she was writing, I'll name a company, specifically about Disney, and this was after Ricky Garcia, a former Disney actor, sued his agent and executives at Disney over what he claims was the systematic sexual abuse of him. So there are these stories, obviously Corey Feldman and other stories, and it's never quite been put together. There's a lot of people
ever been arrested.
A lot of people got taken out by the Me Too movement in Hollywood, but there's very few people that have been taken out. Really, the dots connected and law enforcement involved when it comes to child sexual predation, and it's interesting to me that, but to your point, I mean, look how long sort of the exploitation of women by people like Harvey Weinstein was going on until that finally was exposed too. So it seems like we have sort of the same thing here.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of complicated dynamics as to why one and not the other. I think there's something we're comfortable with as a society. We're comfortable with a certain level of volition, a certain level of cognizance in terms of adults behaving badly towards other adults. We can sort of contextualize that. It's a horror still, but there's something more comfortable about that than this idea. These children who have no recourse, right? And I don't know why. I can tell you that my experience is when I first started thinking about it really seriously, and it was right around the time I was deciding to get married. I realized I had to face this thing. I couldn't go into my marriage with all this baggage and be a bad husband and a bad father. And I found that it was really difficult to even wrap my head around how to find somebody to talk to about it. There's this, a self-imposed shame, but I think in that shame, I think there is some reflection of society as well. It's something we just don't want to talk about, which is one of the reasons I was so happy when this film started coming around. And hey, look, at the office, I was there when development on this thing started, and initially it was going to be a documentary. And then the director, Alejandro, was very, very adamant about wanting to do it as a scripted feature. And the office was melting down over it. I mean, and these are all guys that are like-minded. But they were melting down because they were like, there's no way we can fund this thing because this is a subject you're not allowed to talk about. And there's no way we're going to get distribution because this is a subject you're not allowed to talk about. And I don't know why that is. I don't know why it's so taboo when it's probably one of the biggest horrors in our society.
Well,
people are talking about it now. So.
Well, they are. But I mean, look at how little we know about Jeffrey Epstein's client list.
Yeah, and he had a sex island. Just reminiscent of the movie.
We're all waiting. So Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell.
We're waiting for the list.
Yeah,
where is the list?
Randy Andy over across the pond there, and that's about what we know. We have all these, innuendo and plain manifests, but nobody's been able to, you got big banks settling out of court, so their CEOs and board members don't have to be subpoenaed. It's fat. All the attention paid, and get beyond Jeffrey Epstein's death and the nature of it, and we don't know who else was involved. Nobody was involved except those few people, and yet they had an island. He's got all these houses. You got all these young women making allegations, and nobody. It's remarkable. I mean, it speaks to what you're talking about in Hollywood.
So where could people meet you? Because you're in town this weekend.
That's right. I'm going to be at I think it's called the Hollywood Boulevard Theater.
Woodridge.
They're screening the film.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they're screening the film. Now I've seen the movie, and I can't quite sit through it again. So I'm actually going to sit outside. I keep telling people, if you've seen the movie and you just want to come and hang out, I'll be out sitting out during the screening of the film to talk to people and just hang out. And then after the film, I'll go up and do a little presentation, talk about my own experiences a bit. And I'm hoping for a really long-form Q&A afterwards. It should be a good time.
He is Brandon Bug Hall. The event is a screening of Sound of Freedom. This is Saturday, 10:30 a.m., Hollywood Boulevard Cinema, 1001 75th Street in Woodridge. So again, the Hollywood Boulevard Cinema in Woodridge, screening of Sound of Freedom with Brandon Bug Hall, who went from Hollywood to a Midwestern farmer with 3 young daughters, and good for you. Brandon Bug Hall, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate you sharing your story, and glad to hear how well you're doing, and have fun at the screening this weekend.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And I love on his Instagram, it says self-canceled rascal. He self-canceled himself.
That's good.
Good for him. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's like a hot, steaming cup of information to start your day. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer. Lots of channels, nothing to watch, especially if you're looking outside of big corporate control. It's time